this is a time where private companies need to cooperate. It's in their interest to cooperate, in their financial interest to cooperate.
UBS envisions a world in which planet and people are really at the heart of financial and strategic decision-making, an economy in which social and environmental issues are fully embedded. You've dedicated most of your career exactly towards making the case for that.
Yes.
How do we create an economic system that works for people?
This is an academic speaking, not an administrator. I think bits and pieces, and it has to happen at every institutional level or every scale of operation, from the household up to the international stage. And the logic of ecological economics, if you like, this extended idea of economic reasoning that I've been trying to pursue, if followed through, will tell groups, whether it's a household or communities or whatever, or the nation as a whole, ways to adapt and change. It's not for me to write down a blueprint. That would be just wrong. For anybody to write down a blueprint is a bad idea. We will have to experiment, and experiment with a conceptual framework which is radically different from the one which has guided us over the past 70 years. And what my review tried to do was to expound that vision of economic reasoning, which involves nature intrinsically it embeds the human economy in the biosphere in a very essential way. Yeah.
How come the world created profit for a small proportion of the population, and are we now looking to reverse that?
Tough question, and I'm not a historian of political theory or thought, so what I say is probably suspect, but let me have a whack at it, which is profit per se is not a bad thing, by the way. It's an accounting idea. Split the output of any organization and then ask how to delegate that output into different boxes, wages, rent, profits, and so forth, which is a traditional way of doing things. That per se is not a bad idea because you're classifying. Now, this classifying, of course, results in actuality. That is to say, profits go to some people, wages go to other people, and rents go to somebody else, and so forth. That's for sure. But the problem we have faced is not profit per se, as I feel it, but the way the profit is accounted for, or it's factored in. The fact that a investment project may be trashing the neighboring ecosystem is not included in the profit statement. So the profits do not take into account the activities of the company or the project in question on the effect of it on nature. So that's the bad news. And I think that's how I see it. And of course, there are other things going on. That is to say, there could be monopoly profits and so forth, which economists have spoken a great deal about. I'm cutting free of those arguments because they're much discussed. Corporate profits are too high as a share of GDP and so forth. That class of questions I'm leaving aside because I don't have anything to add or subtract, for that matter, to that discussion. What I would say is that the way profits are counted, measured, is wrong. So obviously, things will go awry because of that.
You mentioned it earlier. GDP says nothing about inequality. Is it perhaps time to focus on a broader set of socio-economic measures?
Yes, that's for sure. But I should say that the concern of including inequality or notions of inequality in economic measurement is old now. It's nothing new about that. For example, the United Nations Environment Programme has a human development index. In fact, if anything, we have too many measures that concern humans, as it were. Inequality, deep poverty, relative poverty, you name the idea of differences, and you'll have a measure for that, and it's been discussed. what I've been writing on is not that, but that a great deal of nature is missing in these accounts. In some ways, I'm becoming now convinced that the rot started with the Enlightenment, as far as back as that. Now, this is I'm an Enlightenment person myself, as you are. I mean, any right-thinking person would be a great admirer of the Enlightenment. The last 400, 500 years of scientific advances and institutional changes, creation of democratic societies, these are fantastic achievements. But one weakness of the Enlightenment has been an excessive focus on the human person who is external, as seen as external to the biosphere, external to Mother Nature. So we see ourselves as separate, and that's a very big mistake. That's been, I think, a tragic mistake. We really need to see ourselves as being part of nature. What we do, we've inherited characteristics which go back 200,000 years or so, ever since we were Homo sapiens, as it were. And to pretend that we can become anything we like, the contemporary conceit that we can be anything we like, is dead wrong, because we are embedded in a past, and the fact that we are embedded in the biosphere, and that sets lots of constraints on the way we think, the way we reason, our desires, and so forth. Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about the human economy is embedded in nature rather than external to it?
Yeah, I could certainly do that. The idea of us being external to, when I use the expression that conventional economics or contemporary economics sees the human economy is external to it, it means that human ingenuity, the presumption is that human ingenuity can overcome the constraints that Mother Nature imposes on us. Okay? So we say, it's customary to say, what are you worried about climate change? We can substitute our way. We don't have to have dirty energy. We can have clean energy. We move to solar system, solar panels, or wind, or water power, or whatever. And there's truth in that. Of course we can. But the idea that that's the framework on which our economic development models are to guide us is dead wrong. Because, as I was suggesting elsewhere, as I have been writing elsewhere, Mother Nature's services are complementary to one another. They're not substitutable. These particular types of examples are substitutes loom large in the climate discussion. But in terms of biodiversity conservation, we really have to care about all the services at one go. We can't simply say, we concentrate on this, protect this, but we can trash the others. Then the whole thing will start crumbling down. By embeddedness, it means that we will never be free of the atmosphere, no matter how ingenious we are. The finiteness of the biosphere will put a constraint on us. Not our ability to think necessarily, because I can't predict how ingenious we can be, but we'll never be able to free ourselves of the biosphere. Now, conventional models, the contemporary models of growth and development and the economics of poverty, assume, and it's a very hidden assumption which most people haven't noticed, that human ingenuity can make us escape, allow us to escape in the long run, so we can have indefinite GDP growth, despite the fact that we are in a finite Earth. That's a subtle, hidden assumption, which you need to know economics, the mathematics of the economics model to be able to detect that hidden assumption. And what I did in my review was to expose that.
Very interesting. So I was wondering, the industry's criticism is that environmental issues are more tangible than social issues. On the environmental side, for instance, we have a 1.5 degrees Celsius target to aim for, while on the social side, there's no one metric to aim for. Do you see this as a barrier, and do you think we can overcome this in some kind of way?
No, I think if you're describing, if I'll take your word for it, but I think the industry is wrong in that. There are huge targets on human. We have targets for poverty alleviation, for example. We have targets for income growth. The entire language of economic development is focused on the human person, as it were. Now, in many cases badly. The rich may trample over the poor, that's for sure. But it's always the rich person and the poor person that we were discussing. Nobody talks about Mother Nature. So I would argue that no, it's just the reverse. We talk more about ourselves than we do about our place in the biosphere, in Mother Nature. I think you're right that there are difficulties of creating metrics for humans. But as I say, so much of attention has been paid to that. Human Development Index, this index and that index, that, how much of education, how many people are educated, literacy rates, poverty rates, and so forth. Same is very, very correct also with regard to environmental matters. In the 1.5 degree is only pertains to climate change. It doesn't pertain to, for example, the conservation of wetlands, mangroves. Each of them will require a different kind of metric. And we do have metrics, by the way. Having said that, we do. But you also have a multiplicity of metrics when it comes to the biosphere, just as we do for the humans. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think
it makes sense. Thank you for clarifying. It's helpful. So UBS really wants to play a more active role in changing the system. Do you have any advice for us on how we can be more effective in doing that?
Well, it'd be presumptuous on me to advise such a distinguished bank as yours, but I think the one thing I would suggest very much is that this is a time where private companies need to cooperate. It's in their interest to cooperate, in their financial interest to cooperate. Let me give you an example of why. This is not just wishful thinking. It's not a kind of a blah, blah statement about goodness of cooperation. So companies have long supply chains. Now consider companies, a whole bunch of companies who have supply chains which start in the tropics. Primary products are sent over and through a whole series chain of actions end up in our supermarkets, okay? And say in Switzerland or England or wherever. Okay, the ecosystems from which the primary products are produced, in which the primary products are produced, are related to one another. The wetlands related to the farm agricultural land next door because the pollinators are in the wetlands and the pollinators help, and so forth. You can give a whole plethora of examples of that kind. So if one of them gets into trouble in terms of degradation, others get affected badly. Now imagine that each of the companies on this side of the sphere has a supply source in one of these, each of these ecosystems. Then if one ecosystem is trashed, the others are going to be affected adversely, in which case the profitability of the first will, of course, be reduced, or there will be greater fluctuations, uncertainty, risk involved, and that will be shared across other companies as well, and vice versa. Now, correlated risks means you can't really have perfect insurance markets by definition. So what do? Each company might say, well, all right, I have an interest in protecting my supply source, but I can't control the supply source of my rival company. And if that gets trashed, mine gets affected adversely. So this is the case where actually I need to get together with my rival. And its mutual protection of the supply sources is of interest to both of us. Now that cooperation might require some form of government action, help to make it a credible agreement. If not, there are more subtle things involved. It may be that one way of ensuring that everybody is complying is to declare the state of affairs along the entire supply chain. Okay, so that's disclosure. And disclosure can be a substitute for markets which are missing, which is the cause of the problem in the first place. Okay. Now, food products, companies which produce food in the supermarkets, do that all the time. They're disclosing the content of their food because we purchasers want to know what we're eating. But you see, now the fact that they're now required to do that, or they'll lose business, is of great importance. Now, I'm suggesting that that kind of argument is relevant for the biodiversity protection issue as well. So companies, I think, could gain by cooperating. And I think the UBS could take a lead in that, being such a prominent organization, to bring nature, actively into the discourse of private companies, because there's a lot to be gained by cooperation, and cooperation with the state as well, in getting the right kind of legislation which enables profits to be enhanced, particularly uncertainty, risk to be reduced.
Thank you. Really enjoyed the conversation with you today, and I'm looking forward to hearing much more of you later.
Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure.